Welcome to Season 1 of Time Travel Misadventures. Where'd you get that dinosaur? The stone lay on the steep, dusty hillside, waiting as it had done for passing ages. It didn't mind. Time meant nothing. What mattered now was that it was seen, that it was found, that the boy picked it up. It felt the rays of the rising sun starting to warm the cold, dry ground beneath it, and a feeling of content stirred in its liquid gold center. The sun would make its rings of red, blue, and gold shimmer and shine. The boy would see it. Chapter 1: Home and a Stone. As soon as the headmaster dismissed assembly, Sam took advantage of the chaos in the passages to ignore the no running rule and ran like a bullet to his dormitory to tear off his school uniform and throw on shorts and a t-shirt. Looking in the mirror, he tousled up his short dark brown hair, transforming it from a neat comb-over into a spiky rat's nest. There, let the holidays begin. His blue eyes twinkled happily back at him. Term was over, and he was going home to the farm for 6 heavenly weeks of summer holiday. He didn't exactly dislike his boarding school. It was okay, but he missed his home. He missed it so much that every night in the dormitory, which smelled of floor cleaner and sweaty socks, he would close his eyes and allow himself to sleep by imagining himself there. In his mind's eye, he and Pieter would go scorpion collecting on the disappearing hill, climb the fruit trees to eat the juicy, dusty fruit, or swim in the cooling, muddy waters of the dam, avoiding the freaky strands of algae which trapped their legs. Sam smiled to himself as he packed his bag, remembering how he and Pieter had teased Maylie, Pieter's younger sister, telling her the algae was the probing tentacles of Octo-Opus, a hungry giant octopus who lived in the dam. That tease had rather backfired, as they had freaked themselves out more than Maylie, who was a toughie, and for a short while had restricted themselves to swimming where the algae grew deep down. In just under an hour, his father would be arriving in the farm truck to take him home to his beloved farm, and of course his best friend Pieter. Pieter lived on the farm, as both his parents worked for Sam's father. Sam and Pieter had been friends since they could toddle across the field which separated the old farmhouse in which Sam lived from Pieter's cottage. They were bound by the fact that both their families had lived and worked on the farm for 3 generations. Pieter's great-grandfather had worked for Sam's great-grandfather, that is, until the day that Sam's great-grandfather had vanished without a trace. Sam's great-grandfather, Francois Nel, had last been seen walking up the big hill close to the farm. The police came and farm folk flocked from the neighbouring farms to help them search, but no trace of him was ever discovered. His mysterious disappearance became a local legend, and many blamed the Tokolosh that was said to live under the hill. They said that the Tokolosh had resented the invasion of his lands and the theft of his underground water when the dry Karoo soil was turned into farmlands. They said that he'd taken his revenge on Mr. Nel when the opportunity came. Sam and Pieter considered themselves blood brothers because of their family's shared past and the fact they got on so well. At the same time Sam was packing his bags, Pieter and Maylie were sitting on the steps which led into the kitchen. They were shooting stones from homemade catapults at a tin balanced on the garden wall. They'd never yet hit anything, but lived in hope. The local school they attended had broken up the day before, and they were alone at home as both their parents were out working. It was early summer, the time for fruit harvest, and their parents left early in the morning, popped in for lunch, and then went out to work till late. As a result, the children were left to their own devices during the day, and Pieter, who was 10, had to take care of 5-year-old Maylie. Perhaps because of the many responsibilities he'd been given from an early age, he was a thoughtful and responsible boy, with dark brown eyes and a serious expression. When he smiled, his face lit up charmingly, revealing the same deep dimples with which Maylie was blessed. But, unlike his sister, he did not weaponize them. Maylie was a free-spirited, cheeky child and ruthlessly used her charms, flashing her dimples and smiling through her wild halo of hair which framed her face in little black coils of energy. Pieter was interested in everything around him and wanted to be a scientist when he grew up. Nobody quite knew what Maylie wanted. "I'm so bored," Maylie said. "Let's go and see if Sam is back yet." "It's much too early. Let's go and swim in the dam." "Okay," Maylie said, jumping up, "but I need to get my dolls first. They like swimming." The farm was in the semi-desert Karoo area of South Africa. The dry wilderness which surrounded the farm was the children's favourite playground and provided endless surprises and adventures. They were allowed to wander wherever they liked, as the only dangers were natural ones: snakes, scorpions, sunburn, thorns, or rock climbing injuries sustained when exploring the rocky hills that dotted the landscape. When they walked up the disappearing hill, the hill on which Sam's great-grandfather had last been sighted, and looked down on the farm, it was a bright green jewel surrounded by the small grey and olive-green plants that grew in the semi-desert of the Karoo. 4 hours later, the farm truck appeared, bouncing and jolting on the rutted dirt track that led to the farmhouse. Sam's head and shoulders stuck clean out of the open window as he gazed joyfully around. As the truck stopped outside the farmhouse, his mother ran out and snatched him up in a big hug before his feet were properly on the ground. Sam hugged her back, then bent down to pick up his madly excited dog, running in hysterical circles around his feet. He kissed the top of her head, happily breathing in her familiar doggy smell. It was not a great smell. She liked to manufacture her own body perfume by rolling in dead and unmentionable things, but it was part of her. He missed her terribly when he was away. Her official name was Phoebe, or this was what Sam had named her, but his father had always called her Fleabee on account of the fleas which had infested her when he had found her. She had been abandoned on the national road, and Sam's father had been unable to drive past the weak-legged, pathetic bundle, a hairbreadth away from being flattened. Fleabee was washed, defleed, dewormed, and fed, and in a very short time metamorphosed from a bundle of misery into a small, scruffy, black and white bundle of energy. Despite, or perhaps because of her past, she had an attitude problem and was very confrontational. She seemed to have no clue that she was petite and vulnerable. She considered herself a terrifying mass of muscle, brawn, and fangs. If she were a large dog, her attitude would have been seriously problematic, but as she was the size of a small rabbit, nobody took her seriously. After dumping his bags in his room, Sam ran across the field to Pieter's cottage, accompanied by an ecstatic Fleabee. The kitchen door was wide open, and he could see Pieter and Maylie sitting at the table, drinking from large blue mugs. They leaped to their feet when they saw him, and Maylie ran to hug him, but Pieter just smiled widely. They did not do hugs. "Hi, you made it," Pieter said gladly. "I have to go back very soon to supper. Mum's made something special, but I wanted to say hello quickly." "Well, hello quickly," Pieter smiled. "Would you like some pot tea?" Pot tea was the brew that his mother put on first thing in the morning, mixing tea leaves and a couple of sprigs from a buchel bush which grew in their garden. It cleaned the blood, his mother said. During the day, more water was added to the pot, and pot tea was horribly strong in the morning and too weak by evening, but pot tea tasted of home. Sam added 3 huge teaspoons of sugar, something not allowed at home, and settled down to hear the latest news and to make plans for the following day. "I want to go fossil hunting tomorrow," he said, stirring his tea. "We learned about fossils at school this term, and apparently here, the Karoo, it was one of the best places to find them in the world. This area used to be a huge inland sea with lots of rivers. Funny, because it's a semi-desert now. Imagine, this area was literally crawling with dinosaurs and things. My teacher said that people come from all over the world to study our dinosaur fossils, and the animals which lived here even before the dinosaurs." "What is a fossil?" Maylie asked. "It's the remains of a plant or animal that lived long ago, and it's been preserved by becoming fossilized." "But how does it become fossilized?" Maylie asked, wrinkling her nose. "Well, things like bones or teeth or shells, and also parts of plants and trees, become fossils if the conditions are right for fossilization. Like they must absorb minerals from the soil. Minerals are what you find in rocks. So the plant or animal becomes hard and rock-like, and it can survive for millions and millions of years." "We learned about fossils this term too," Pieter said. "You get 2 types, body fossils, which are part of a plant or animal, or trace fossils, which are things like dinosaur footprints." "All fossil poo. Trace fossils tell you about how an animal behaved." What can fossil poop tell you, except that whatever made it wasn't constipated, Sam said jokingly, and Maylie giggled and said, I want a fossil poo. Paleontologists cut the poos open, or they x-ray them, to find out what sort of things the poopers ate. We'll see if we can find you one, Maylie, Pieter said, casting a speaking glance at Sam, who understood it perfectly. The glance said that he would meet him early by the treehouse in the old oak, before Maylie was up and doing. Maylie always wanted to go with them on their expeditions, but did not have the qualities desirable in a fellow explorer. She got tired and bored after they'd walked hardly any distance, was always getting thirsty, and seemed to attract thorns, and there were a lot of plants which had thorns in the karoo. Removing thorns from Maylie was a dramatic and noisy task, and always sounded like someone was being tortured rather than receiving kind medical assistance. Sam tipped up his mug to get the last sweet drop of pot tea and stood up. I have to go. Mum's waiting, but I'll see you tomorrow morning, first thing. Next morning, Sam awoke very early to the sound of Chickie's hoarse crow. Chickie had been an orphan chick that he had adopted, and he had lived with Sam until he was big and strong enough to join their flock of chickens. He was still a young cockerel and sounded croaky and uncertain, like a very nervous idols contestant. A few seconds after Chickie's feeble crow, further away, by Pieter's house, the rooster in charge crowed in reply, followed by yet another even more distant crow. Sam hugged himself with joy. He was definitely home. The crow clocks were operating. How much nicer it was to be woken by crowing, rather than by his teacher, Mr. Mitchell, who woke them every single morning by throwing open the dormitory door with a horrible loud crash and shouting, "Time to get up! It's another day in paradise!" When Sam first arrived at the school, he thought it was quite funny, but after a while it became excruciatingly irritating, and, like the other boys, he began to have dark fantasies about booby traps which would activate when Mr. Mitchell opened the dorm door. The boys in his dorm had taken an oath that on their very last morning in primary school, when they were about to leave to go to high school and would be safe from punishment, they would wreak revenge. They spent hours every week in happy negotiation and argument as to how lethal the trap would be. Debiso, who had strict parents, always said, "Mustn't kill him. We don't want to go straight from primary school into juvie." Mark, who was the opposite of cautious, always replied with things like, "Okay, but we can still maim him a little." After a hasty breakfast of cereal, Sam rushed through his toothbrushing, eager to meet up with Pieter for the fossil hunt. He didn't take Phoebe, and feeling terribly guilty, he locked her in his bedroom. She was a terrible snake hunter, and he knew he would be too busy hunting for fossils to keep a close eye on her. He did it for his safety, but it still seemed terribly mean when he was just home. "I promise you we'll go for a walk after lunch, Phoebe," he said, dropping a kiss onto the top of a small snout. "Mum, will you let Phoebe out in about half an hour so she doesn't follow me?" "I will. Where are you going?" "To find fossils with Pieter on the disappearing hill." "Fossils? That sounds interesting. Please take your watch and make sure you're back in time for lunch." "Yes, Mum," Sam shouted, running joyfully out of the back door and into the country fresh morning air. Perfect timing. He could see Pieter approaching at a fast jog over the field. He arrived puffing and looking rather stressed. "Maylie's just about finished her breakfast and she's looking for something to do. I said she should have a B&D tea party, but she might still decide she wants to come along." "B&D?" "Bear and dull," Pieter said, and he and Sam laughed. The boys ran to the far side of the field, climbed a fence, and jogged along a dirt track which led through the apricot orchard. On the other side of this lay the wilderness, and their destination, the disappearing hill, where Sam's great-grandfather had disappeared. "Where on the hill do you think is a good place to look for fossils?" Pieter asked, slowing to a walk. They were out of sight of the houses and fear of Maylie, and were walking on dry, stony ground, sparsely covered in scrubby shrubs and fleshy-leaved succulents. Pieter and Sam called succulents camel plants because, just like camels, the succulents stored up water in their thick leaves so they could survive the cooking hot Karoo summer. "My teacher said that things are more likely to fossilize when they become quickly covered by mud or sand after dying, like in a flood or when an animal dies underground in its burrow," Sam replied. "I guess it protects them from scavengers and things. So we need to go and look where there are sedimentary rocks. That's rocks made of layers of sand and stuff, which have turned into rock over time, right?" "Yep. And you also get rock made from lava, which is called igneous rock. And the third sort is what was it again?" Metamorphic rock, Pieter said triumphantly. That's rock that's got squashed and heated up in the Earth's crust. You can't find fossils in metamorphic rock. They'd have been destroyed. It will be so cool to find a fossil, Sam said, giving a happy little jump. He and Pieter always craved adventure and moaned about how ordinary their lives were, and now they were explorers of the past. The boys decided to walk to the very top of the hill, recalling that the rocks there had different coloured layers and were, they guessed, sedimentary rocks. The sun was getting hot as they started to walk up the steep slope, and they began to sweat. As Sam walked, by habit, he kept an eye out for snakes. He knew they would be moving out of their hidey holes to bask in the sun and warm their reptile bodies. As he glanced down at the ground, a flash of gold caught his eye. Curious, he bent down and saw a flat, round pebble with a red centre ringed by gold. The thick gold ring was in turn surrounded by a deep blue ring, and the rim had a glittery, silvery covering. Sam stared at it, puzzled. The colours seemed extraordinarily bright, and the rings too perfect for it to be a stone. But they clearly weren't painted. They were part of it. As he picked it up, he felt it was strangely light. It seemed to have hardly any weight at all. It gave him a weird feeling, and for a couple of seconds, as he gazed at it, its outline became blurry and wavy, like when you look too long in the sun. He was distracted from his musings by Pieter, who had almost reached the top of the hill and was shouting, "Come on, slow coach! Finders keepers, losers weepers! I'm going to find the first fossil!" He put the pebble carefully into his pocket and tore up the hill after Pieter. He didn't want that to happen. Please join us next week for Chapter 2, The First Adventure.